He was a man who had it all, billions in the bank, a global empire at his fingertips, and the power to shatter fortunes with a single word. His name was Julian Croft, and to the world he was a titan of industry, a ruthless predator in a bespoke suit. His days were a storm of hostile takeovers and high-stakes deals. His nights were a blur of empty parties and even emptier company. He'd mastered the art of acquiring assets, but he'd long forgotten how to make a real human connection. But then, in the sterile silence of a hospital room, none of that mattered. A sudden, violent illness had stolen his power, leaving him helpless and hooked up to the steady beeping of machines. His life was suddenly in the hands of the one person his money couldn't possibly control, the nurse who refused to see him as anything but another patient. Her name was Clara Evans, and she was about to do more than just save his life. She was about to give him one worth living. The day it all fell apart started like any other for Julian. He was in the middle of a tense video conference, his voice a low growl as he tore apart a rival company's defenses. His COO, Marcus, watched with a mix of awe and fear. Julian wasn't just a man, he was a force of nature. But then, something shifted. A sharp, crushing pain exploded in his chest, stealing his breath. The faces on the screen blurred. He could hear distant shouting, someone calling his name, but it sounded like it was coming from underwater. The last thing he saw was Marcus's panicked face before his entire world, a world he'd built with iron and will, dissolved into blackness. He woke up to a world of white ceiling, white sheets, and the soft rhythmic beep of a heart monitor that was, for the moment, his. Disoriented and already furious, Julian tried to sit up, a list of demands already on his lips. A firm but gentle hand on his shoulder stopped him. "Easy there," a calm voice said. "You're not in the boardroom anymore. You had a severe cardiac event. You're lucky to be alive." Julian's eyes focused on the woman by his bed. She wore simple blue scrubs. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes held a professional warmth that was completely missing the fear or awe he was used to. This was Clara Evans. While Julian was building an empire on the failures of others, Clara was building a life on quiet moments of healing. She was an ICU nurse, a path she chose after helplessly watching her own father fade away from a long illness. She vowed then to never feel that powerless again, and to dedicate her life to fighting for others. She worked double shifts to support her mother and younger sister, finding her reward not in a bank account, but in the steady rhythm of a patient's recovering heartbeat. Julian, used to being obeyed instantly, glared at her. "Get my assistant on the phone, now!" It wasn't a request. Clara didn't even flinch. She just checked his IV drip, her movements sure and efficient. "Your assistant knows you're here. My priority right now is you, Mr. Croft, not your phone calls. Your heart needs to rest. The world can wait." For the first time in 20 years, Julian Croft was speechless. Someone had actually said no to him, not as a negotiating tactic, not as a power play, but as a simple fact. He was just another body in a bed, another chart to be updated. He studied her, this woman who seemed completely immune to his power. He saw no angle, no greed in her eyes. It was a new and deeply unsettling experience. He was in her world now, and the rules were completely different. This is just the beginning of their story, a collision of two worlds that couldn't be more different. If you're already hooked, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss a single moment of what happens next. The days that followed were a special kind of hell for Julian. Stripped of his phone, his laptop, and his army of assistants, he was left with nothing but his own thoughts and the four walls of his private room. His empire, which once felt like a part of him, was now just a distant echo. He was forced into a stillness he hadn't known since he was a child. His only consistent link to the world was Clara. She was his nurse on the night shift, that time when the hospital quiets down and the day's ghosts come out to play. Julian was a terrible patient. He fought the staff about his medication, complained about the food, and treated every checkup like a personal attack. But Clara handled him with an unshakable calm. She didn't baby him, but she didn't bow to his temper either. She just did her job with a quiet competence that, slowly but surely, began to disarm him. The change started during those long, sleepless nights. The painkillers made him groggy, blurring the edges of his defenses. He'd wake up from nightmares, heart pounding, the memory of his own mortality fresh and terrifying. In those raw moments, it was always Clara who was there. She wouldn't say much, just adjust his pillows or offer a glass of water, and her steady presence was enough to chase the shadows away. One night, unable to sleep, he watched her as she quietly made her rounds. "Don't you ever get tired of this?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Of seeing people at their worst?" Clara finished writing down his vitals before turning to him. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I also get to see them at their strongest. I see people fight to get back to their families. There's a beauty in that." He scoffed, a reflex. "It's a chemical reaction, a biological need to survive." "Maybe," she said, a small smile on her lips. "Or maybe it's love, something to live for." Their nightly conversations became a ritual. He started out mocking her idealism with his jaded cynicism. She would listen patiently, then counter his cold logic with simple truths about her own life. He learned she dreamed of one day opening a free clinic. He learned about her younger sister, a talented artist struggling to pay for college. He learned about the worn-out copy of To Kill a Mockingbird she kept in her locker, a gift from her late father. He started to see her not just as a nurse, but as a person. And through her eyes, he started to see others differently too. He noticed the exhaustion on the faces of the other nurses, the quiet fear in the eyes of the family across the hall. One evening, Clara came into his room looking troubled. She spoke quietly about a young girl in the pediatric ward whose family couldn't afford a life-saving experimental treatment. She wasn't asking him for anything. She was just thinking out loud, sharing the weight of her day. The next morning, Julian made his first and only demand, a 10-minute unsupervised call with his CFO. He didn't say why. 2 days later, an anonymous $10 million donation was made to the hospital, earmarked specifically for the pediatric oncology department. When a joyful Clara told him about the miracle donation that night, he just grunted and changed the subject. But something inside him had shifted. For the first time, he had used his incredible wealth not to take something but to give something. The feeling was profoundly addictively different. Just as Julian was starting to get used to this new, quieter life, his old one came crashing back in. News of his recovery had leaked to the press, and the sharks started circling. His COO, Marcus, was the first to arrive. Marcus had always been Julian's loyal pit bull, but now he saw his boss's illness and introspection as a dangerous weakness. He came armed with contracts and market analyses, his words coated in a thin layer of concern that barely hid his ambition. "Julian, the board is getting nervous," he'd say. "We need the old Croft back." Then came his family. His younger brother and sister, who only showed up when they needed money, arrived with bouquets of flowers that were as plastic as their smiles. They saw his vulnerability not as a reason for compassion, but as an opportunity. Their entire conversation was a thinly veiled attempt to figure out if he was losing his mind, and if control of the company might be up for grabs. It was during one of these visits that Clara walked in to check his vitals. Julian's sister looked her up and down with open disdain. "Julian, darling, is this really the best care your money can buy?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "She looks rather plain." Before Clara could even react, something in Julian snapped. The old predator inside him woke up, but this time it wasn't for business. It was for her. "Get out," he said, his voice dangerously low. His brother and sister just stared, stunned. "Her name is Clara," Julian continued, his gaze like ice. "She has shown me more genuine care in 3 weeks than you two have in my entire life. Now get out of my sight." They scrambled out of the room, faces pale with shock. Julian was breathing heavily, the effort costing him. Clara rushed to his side, her expression a mix of surprise and concern. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered, fluffing his pillows. "You need to rest." "Some things are worth the energy," he said, looking at her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. But the incident left its mark on Clara. She'd had a glimpse into Julian's world, a cold, transactional place full of people who saw her as nothing more than the help. She started to pull back, her professionalism becoming a shield. She'd overheard whispers about Julian's ruthless past, about a company called Vance Electronics, a small family-run business that Croft Industries had acquired and dismantled years ago, leaving hundreds jobless. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. A seed of doubt was planted. Was she just a novelty to him, a temporary distraction? The connection they had built suddenly felt fragile, threatened by the massive gap between their lives. She feared that once he was back in his world, she would be nothing but a footnote. What she didn't know was that Vance Electronics was more than a ghost from Julian's past. It was a secret that was about to destroy the only pure thing in his life. Marcus, the COO, thrived on information. He'd watched the bond grow between his boss and the nurse with a calculating eye. To him, Clara wasn't a person. She was a variable, a threat to his own ambitions. He hired a private investigator to dig into her past, looking for any leverage he could use. And he found it. The name Vance, from the old acquisition files, wasn't just some random company. It was Clara's family. Her father, a brilliant engineer, had founded Vance Electronics. The hostile takeover by Croft Industries had been a brutal, merciless campaign, led by a younger, more ruthless Julian Croft. The stress and ruin had directly contributed to her father's first heart attack, the beginning of the long decline she had witnessed as a child. Marcus saw his opening. He put together a file, news clippings, internal memos with Julian's callous notes, and statements showing the financial ruin of the Vance family. He had the file anonymously delivered to Clara during her shift with a note. He knew who you were the entire time. You were just a game to him. For Clara, the world tilted on its axis. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The familiar name, the kindness that felt too good to be true. It was all a lie. The man whose life she had saved was the man who had destroyed her father's. The vulnerability she had cherished now felt like a cruel manipulation. The pain was sharp and blinding. She confronted him that night, the file clutched in her trembling hands as she threw it on his bed. Was this all a game, Julian? Some sick form of penance, or just another conquest? Julian stared at the documents, the color draining from his face. He was completely blindsided. He remembered the acquisition, but it was just one of dozens from that era. He had never connected the name on a decade-old legal document to the woman standing before him. Clara, no, he pleaded, trying to sit up. I didn't know, I swear to you I didn't know. But his words couldn't cut through the storm of her betrayal. All she could see was the monster from her past, wearing the face of the man she was starting to love. I can't look at you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I see what you did to my father. Without another word, she turned and walked out of his room and out of his life. The next day, he learned she had transferred to another hospital. She was gone. Julian was discharged a week later, his body healed but his spirit shattered. He returned to his sprawling, empty penthouse, a palace that now felt like a prison. The city lights glittered below, but they gave him no warmth. He had his empire back, his power, his wealth, and it was all worthless. He had lost the only thing that had ever made him feel alive, but beneath the despair, the old Julian Croft, the man of action, began to stir. This time he wasn't driven by profit or power, but by a desperate need for redemption. With a new kind of clarity, he turned his resources inward. It took him less than 12 hours to trace the leak back to Marcus. Julian didn't just fire him. He called an emergency board meeting, exposed Marcus's treachery, and had him escorted from the building in disgrace. But that was just business. It did nothing to fix the real damage. Julian knew that just saying sorry was meaningless. Words wouldn't undo what his company had done, so he did something no one would have ever expected. He flew to Clara's hometown and found her mother living in a modest house. He didn't send a lawyer or an assistant. He went himself. He sat in their small living room and, with a humility that would have been unthinkable just months before, he apologized. He took full responsibility for destroying Vance Electronics and for the pain it caused her family. But he didn't stop there. He announced the creation of the Vance Foundation, a multi-million-dollar fund to support small tech startups and provide grants for aspiring engineers, everything her father had loved. He offered to personally fund her sister's college education, not as a handout, but as an investment in her talent. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a better future from the wreckage. He finally found Clara working at a small underfunded community clinic across the city. She was pouring her pain into her work, just as she always had. He didn't arrive in a limo. He walked up to the entrance, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit, his face stripped of all its old arrogance. He found her in a small office sorting medical supplies. He didn't make excuses. "I came to tell you that you were right," he said softly. "I was a monster. I destroyed things without a second thought, including people. I can't change what I did to your father, and I will live with that forever, but you changed me. You saved my life, Clara, and not just in that hospital room. You saved me from myself." He took a hesitant step closer. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I had to tell you that the man you see now exists only because of you, and he is hopelessly in love with you." Clara looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the profound change inside him. She saw it not just in his words, but in the selfless things he had done. The anger that had been protecting her heart began to melt away, replaced by a fragile hope. She took his hand. Their story didn't end with a lavish wedding or a return to his penthouse. It ended with the two of them walking out of that small clinic together, hand in hand, into the quiet evening. He hadn't just found love. He had, with her help, finally found his own humanity. What did you think of Julian and Clara's journey? Could you forgive someone for a past like that? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more stories that will capture your heart, don't forget to like this video.